So last week, a very interesting video about Ashes of Creation popped into my feed. If you guys aren't following Narc, his coverage of Ashes of Creation is very unique. In fact, his style of, skits before he gets into the video itself is absolutely entertaining, and I will include a link to his video in this description because this video, in a way, is acting as a response. But it's not just a response to Ashes of Creation, it's a response to the Riot MMORPG that's upcoming. It's a response to MMO gaming hype culture that we see happen time and time again. And the more that I think about how, let's say, Riot MMO versus the Ashes of Creation MMO are being handled and communicated and on display and not on display, it provides a very interesting, almost kind of a scientific study, an A/B test, if you will, because one of the things that I keep hearing being told by many different gamers is that Riot's MMO is the MMO to be excited about. Riot MMO is the next great MMORPG, and Ashes of Creation is going to be a very niche game, so to speak. But what Narc goes in to talk about is how the community is starting to get frustrated, starting to get angry, and I think what you end up having here is a perfect example of information overload versus not enough information and hype culture with MMORPGs. And what I mean by that is MMOs, especially when you compare them, especially when you look at the hype around them, there's a very clear and easy to discern pattern that keeps happening time and time again. It's one of the challenges of the industry itself because you get overhyped and then you have death spirals, and as long as you can survive those death spirals, chances are you're going to find a decent sized community that wants to support your game. However, what ends up happening, what you end up seeing a lot of times, is a lot of people will compare and contrast any MMO out there to a utopian MMO, the one that doesn't exist. I've seen Lazy Peon kind of talk about this to a degree where he describes his perfect MMO, and everything he plays is going to be measured up against that perfection that does not exist. And I'm not saying that Lazy is wrong. I'm not saying that anybody's wrong for doing it. I'm just saying it presents a unique challenge as gamers and as people who look to try and provide feedback and try to talk about the things and where games fall short when they kind of don't land and hit our expectations. And I think that's exactly what's happening right now with Riot's MMO versus the Ashes of Creation MMO. And it's that as we get more information about Ashes of Creation, it becomes less and less theoretical. It becomes more and more solid. Even though I would argue from a game development perspective, until they ship a product, and especially with MMOs, but until they ship a product, everything is fluid. Anything can change, anything will change. They're going to iterate and work on it to make sure they ideally find the fun and hopefully produce the best product that they can, both for themselves as a company and for the players who are interested in it as a game. But anyhow, look at Riot. We don't know anything about Riot's MMO. It is so vague. It is so mysterious. I think that's where you end up seeing many gamers start to talk about it and look at it as a source of hope, as a source of a savior of the genre, of something that's going to revitalize the entire genre itself, where that once mantle was held by Ashes, and that mantle is slowly being passed over to Riot's MMO because we know nothing about it. So it can live in our minds. It can grow to be the perfect MMORPG, and it's only when we're faced with the reality does that crash occur. And I think that's one part of the crash that's actually happening that I don't believe Narc actually kind of touched on as much as I would have appreciated it if he did. And the other side of it that he talked about is that obviously information fatigue. Ashes of Creation, just like the Riot's MMO, in my mind, I've been setting my expectations to 2025 for the Ashes of Creation MMO. If they deliver sooner and it's complete, great. 2025 feels like the right time to be able to deliver on something this massive. Now, from all the different dev updates, I feel like they're making really good and decent progress. But even within that progress cycle, it is still a long thing to wait for. It's still a long thing to be hyped about. It's still a long thing to follow intently and passionately, especially when there's a lot of other things that you could be playing right now, not even within the MMO space, just a lot of games coming out here in the next 6 months alone. I know for myself, I'm very excited about Final Fantasy 16 in June, Diablo 4 in June. I hope to goodness gracious that they don't put anything else stacked up in June, because that is going to be a very fatiguing style month to go up against. So note to self, like there's a lot to be excited about, and it's perfectly fine for people to lose interest in Ashes right now and then come back to be able to kind of digest a lot of information about what's all changed. To bring up a third game, kind of a game that I thought was a very risky game and a game that I wish they continued to work on, but they didn't, was Anthem 2.0 or Anthem Next. One of the things the development team said they were going to over communicate. They're going to talk us through all the things they're working on. COVID happened. They shut down the game. I think that was a tragedy. I believe they could have saved Anthem if they wanted to, but I don't think that's very clear that EA wanted to continue to fund the development. Nor, one of the things I think you also look at that game is that I think the team probably just didn't really care that much or was fatigued by it and wanted to move on. So no judgment in that regards. But in that information, when it comes to communicating development and the processes and the iterative processes and the finding the fun processes versus communicating that to gamers, is that there is this weird thing that I see happen a lot, and I'm guilty of it. This isn't something that is like a gamer problem. This is something that I think is everybody problem, is that sometimes when in development you communicate a feature, people take that as a promise. That feature might end up not being fun. It might be antithetical to the enjoyment of the game, your experience within. And because of those things happening, you end up running into this risk of people feeling let down by promises that didn't end up reflecting actual gameplay fun in testing and, you know, and different iterations of the game itself. And that's one of the risks that I see happening, being that I've seen a lot of people praise Ashes for its information. Here's where, and my biggest critique of Ashes that I would say, because it is a red flag for me, it is a concern. While I am personally absolutely rooting for Ashes' success, everything that they continue to communicate to me on paper sounds amazing. It sounds right up my alley, whether you want to be like a hardcore player or you want to be able to just be a crafter and gatherer and participate in the sandbox game that is going on within it. But my critique ends up being is that part of the reason I feel they over communicate is that's a huge part of their marketing. Their marketing is information. Their marketing drives people to go into the cash shop and spend money on a game that is at least a couple years away. People talk about their fatigue with the cash shop items, yada, yada, yada. And that in and of itself is understandable, but that's a part of how they're marketing their game. When you contrast this to something like Embers Adrift, which doesn't have any marketing at all. And one of the things that I hope to put out for you guys soon is going over their latest patch notes, which are pretty lean, as they get ready to kind of rock and roll here in 2023 with more updates to come. And so my goal for, if you guys haven't seen, me kind of talking about it, like my goal is to hit level 7 this week in Embers. I'm enjoying it. It's a very weird experiment, but one that I'm actually interested in kind of participating with, at least for the short term. But there's lots of things that are obviously vying for my attention and a lot of things I'm having a lot of fun with. But back to the subject at hand in terms of Ashes. I think that as the MMO community goes, one of the reasons why it's such a roller coaster of a community, and I use the community in the terms of MMORPG fans, those who are invested and interested in the genre and interested in its success, not necessarily worried about tribalism fights between different games within any genre, but absolutely just like as long as MMOs are being made and people are there to play them, it's good for everybody, even if you want to feel like your MMO is better than any others out there. But one of the things I feel like as a kind of a, almost a culture we struggle with is this hype mentality, this next big MMO mentality, this mentality that's always seeking and yet never really satisfied for that thing to come in and fill the gap. Narc says this in all his videos. He's just one nerd desperate for a good MMO. And I would counter that there are really good MMOs out there right now that you can play and follow, but he doesn't have to agree with that. Like, that's the beauty of discourse. But I'm just saying that that kind of mentality has me concerned. The things I've heard Lazy and other big content creators say about Ashes or Riot, that the genre's doomed if they're not successful. And the other challenge with that is that what is your definition of success for these games? I think a lot of people want to see something like World of Warcraft happen again, where the numbers are just absolutely absurd. And here's my thing. I've heard people say that can't happen. I'd like to offer a disagreement, but I think it can happen. But there's got to be a big technological leap, something that could not have been done before that now can be done when it comes to this genre specifically, or online games specifically. And I don't know what that technological leap will be. Maybe it's going to come in the form of Ashes or Pantheon or Riot or, yada, 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 MMO after MMO. And I think that's one of the things I actually get a lot of joy within the genre itself, where I feel like we're entering a new age where there are more options and people are willing to take more risks and try new things and iterate on systems that perhaps failed in the past. But regardless of that, I think it's just something that's interesting that I see happening. I think the reasons why a lot of the players are getting frustrated is twofold. Information overload, long way to go, still a marathon. They're not sprinting to a release. Hype cycles can work really well within kind of a confined space and time. But then the fact is that you're not going to see I don't think you're going to see a release in 2023. If I'm wrong, man, that's going to be a great one to be wrong about. But all that being said is that I think that the other side of it is we've got to understand ourselves a little bit better. We got to understand that there's no perfect MMO out there. And some of what I think is happening also is that as the information becomes more definitive, the illusions or the utopia becomes further and further away. Anyway, guys, that's just my perspective. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Hopefully, if you did, I don't know, do something. Leave a comment, hit a like button, hit a dislike button. I don't know, go call your mom or something like that and tell her she's great. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for your time. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully I'll see you in my next video. But until then, take care.